Introducing Tom and Doug here from Clinton National Airport. I want to give a little background on this relationship. It's a really special partnership for us here at Procore. Working with Tom and Doug, we started in 2020. They were one of our early adopters of Procore for owners and Procore from the public sector. We had a lot of challenges with them getting started at the time. We were developing our product for owners, and we hit a few snags up front for where their outcomes and where their goals were to where we needed to be. Tom and Doug were instrumental in providing that feedback to us. They worked with our product team. There were a lot of the feedback for what we now have with WBS, with reporting, with the dictionary actually changing from prime contracts over to funding for owners. A lot of that was their feedback and a lot of things that they implemented. Over the past 2 years, we've worked to put together a few strategies that we're going to speak to today about their data strategy and how they're getting the outcomes that they need, and been instrumental for us in also talking with other airports, other public clients. They're more than happy to talk at all times, and really been a great partnership. Right here we have our AIA sheet here, so if you are an AIA member, you do get credit for this. They have the credit course number LW462, and the credit is 1AIA-LU. I don't know what that stands for. Learning Unit, fantastic. Great, so here's our two speakers for the day. Tom Clarke, Deputy Executive Director, Clinton National Airport, and Doug Bennett. And I'll pass it over for these two to give us a presentation.
Great, good afternoon. Congratulations on making it through day 3 and being here for the final session. So really appreciate that. You guys are really dedicated. I want to tell you a little bit about Clinton National Airport, kind of who we are, and then we'll jump into Procore. Our airport is in Little Rock, Arkansas, center of the state. We're a small hub. We have we have 12 gates at our airport and handle about 2 million passengers a year. Our capital program will vary from 5 million to 25 million per year. And the big thing about an airport is we're like a city. We do everything. We have the horizontal work, which are our runways and taxiways. We have vertical work. We have the terminal building itself. We have a fire station. We have airfield maintenance. We have a business park that's on our property as well, and other commercial properties that we maintain, and do capital improvements on all those. On our timeline, you can see that we started late in 2020 with our initial setup. And we're lucky enough to have our implementation manager here to cheer us on again. I asked her to go ahead and spread that same pixie dust on us that she did when we first implemented that made us successful. So hopefully that'll carry through our presentation. But you can tell that from that first setup, that was before we had the real work breakdown structure. We had the cost codes and we had cost types. So you had 3 tiers that we had to use to manage all of our cost tracking and the multiple funding sources that we'll get into. But we succeeded, and just looking ahead, using that new WBS structure, we processed our first invoice in Procore for approval in March of 22. So from September of 20 to March of 22 to get our first invoice approved in Procore. But I'm happy to say that now we're processing every one of our architects, engineers, and contractors' invoices in Procore. The contractor enters them, our engineer and architect of record review them, they do the approval, they go through our internal workflow and get into final approval for payment. When we were setting this up, we identified 4 critical success factors. Since it's late in the game, I thought it would be more entertaining to consider this like a baseball game. We had a pretty good series the last couple of weeks. I don't know if you have any Houston fans here. Okay, I knew there had to be a few. Really good series, really good series. But the 4 critical success factors that you see, first are our unit price line item contracts. When you do flat work, it's based on cubic yards of earthwork, square feet of pavement, lineal feet of drainage pipe that you install. We have multiple funding sources. As a public entity, we get the bulk of our funding from FAA, or Department of Transportation. When you're using DOT and federal money, there are other federal strings attached. So you have to make sure you're compliant. Then we have our DBE and minority spend tracking. That's also a critical success factor, very important. And finally, connecting to our ERP. We use Microsoft Dynamics D365, so that's the important one for us. Okay, so what's on first base? That's our unit price line item contracts. For our heavy civil projects, the thing that's different from an owner's perspective is that the construction contract for a unit price contract has hundreds of lines of items. The owner doesn't really care about each of those lines, but the owner does care intently about who we're paying, that contractor and each of his subcontractors. We have to make sure that they are being paid according to the original agreement and being paid timely. So we want to track that information. And the work breakdown structure allowed us to do that using the company code and our division or task codes that we can use as detailed as necessary, both for the soft cost for architects and engineers, as well as our construction and construction trades. Okay. On our DOT grants, we'll have multiple funding sources, and it's not just one grant. And when you're using an FAA grant, it's tied to a usable unit of construction. The FAA wants to know, if they give me a grant for $10 million, how much pavement is that paying for, and where is it? So I've got to go out and say it's going from station 50 to station 1400 is what you've paid for. Procore has to track that information, and we have to define that by a funding source. We also combine that with local funds. For our Taxiway Charlie project, and included a taxi lane into a private commercial development, DeSoto Falcon Jet. They paid for half of it, so we had to track their cost separately. The work breakdown structure again gave us a solution. It's that granularity that it offers that you can put in not just that sub-job, but your funding code to go with it that we defined that allows us to track that cost all the way through to the appropriate funding source. Okay, on third base. This is a really important item both for federal requirements and for our local community. We have our DBE tracking and our minority spend, women-owned businesses. Our commission has a policy that we spend at least 15% of our funding or construction projects towards minority and women-owned business. The FAA has a similar requirement. The FAA mandates that you report that on an annual basis. So if you take money from Uncle Sam, you will submit that report every December 1st. And Procore allows us to do that because of the work breakdown structure. All right, the final requirement for us in our critical success factor was tying to the ERP to pay those invoices I mentioned, but also to allow us to apply for a reimbursement from our funding source. We have to use that standard form SF-271. So if you're a public owner, you're very familiar with that form. You use it to get reimbursed for all your projects. You have to be able to track that data and plug it in the right fields. Again, the work breakdown structure is the tool that we've used to do that. Our finance group required us to add in our general ledger code, our department code, and our cost center to make sure that we're meeting our requirement for our financial services. That way, not only are we exchanging the data, but we have to meet their standards. We have our properties planning and development group that's running Procore. We have our finance department that's paying the bills. They don't trust Procore yet until they make sure that the numbers are in compliance with what they expect. So we've been running in parallel, making sure that we build up their confidence. This kind of is a snapshot of our work breakdown structure as it relates to each of those critical success factors and how we have implemented those. It's kind of a quick and easy way to see how we got to where we are. And you're looking at 2 years worth of work, a lot of sweat and tears that went into this, and probably worth your price of admission if you are a public owner similar to us. With that, I'll let Doug now jump in and show you the fun stuff and show you how we apply these principles in practice in Procore.
Well, we'll see exactly how fun you think this is. Exactly what we're doing is we're taking an amount-based project or a quantity-based project and we're translating it into an amount-based project. And if you're tracking funding and DBE already on your projects, it's a relatively simple process. Our invoice workflow, the subs will invoice the prime. The prime will send that to our engineer consultant. He'll confirm all the details, and then he'll enter that invoice into Procore, which we get it, and we go through a workflow approval process, and then we ship it over to D365 for payment. Okay. Each commitment contract on the project is structured like this. Now, don't let this scare you. Okay? Contract line item structure. We separate the line items by the dollar value according to in the following order. Funding source. On federal projects, it's determined by the grants. The cost type, DBE, each sub has a certain cost type, and a classification. And the classification code is used to distribute funds into our cost distribution sheet, which in turn feeds the SF-271. Okay, here's the part you might get scared at. This is our budget code structure. Okay, this is using the work breakdown structure. And we also have some legacy stuff in for pre-WBS. So the items we want to talk about, we want to point out right here are highlighted in yellow. If you'll notice, the prime contractor, Weaver Bailey, they're with the funding source, AIP 104. The classification is K1, and they have a cost type of 1. Down below, also highlighted in yellow, they're also in funding source AIP 104, classification of K1, but they're a cost type of 16. Each one of those cost types, number 1 is a local non-DBE contractor. A 16 is a local women-owned, woman-owned DBE. And if you look down below, we've also got a separate funding source. You'll also notice there's Weaver Bailey. They're AIP 2025, classification K1, cost type of 1. And again, to point out another DBE type, Brian Blood Hauling down there, cost type of 21. And that's a Native American DBE. I need a glass of water. Okay, cool. All right, so where's the justification? So you got people dumping a bunch of concrete out there. They're laying pipe, they're hauling dirt, gravel, whatever. Where are the quantities? Well, we store those in the attachment on the invoice. So all that detail travels with the invoice, but in the attachments. And anytime Tom or somebody wants to go look at that and marry it up, it's all been verified by our consultants, but that detail goes with the invoice. All right, so here's the key point right here. Decide what you want to track prior to setup. In one of the other discussions, a young lady says, she went to her Procore and says, okay, show me what you got. And the Procore comes back and says, well, what do you want to do? Well, that's exactly right. What do you want to do? How do you want to set this up? You have to figure that out. In our case, we're interested in funding source. We're interested in DBE. We're interested in date paid. When we pay it, that's how we track it, by date paid. And we're interested in the classification so we can feed our cost distribution sheet and our SF-271. That's what we're interested in. With the Procore work breakdown structure, you can get line level granularity on all your reports. Decide what you want to track, give it a segment, and give it a code. This is a screenshot of our work breakdown structure in Procore, the admin screen. You can see the different segments that we have available. And moving on, this is exactly how we have it structured. This is based on the new work breakdown structure. This is based on our new work breakdown structure in Taxiway Charlie Phase 2. Okay, segment 1 is a GL account. Segment 2 is a department. Segment 3 is a cost center. Some of these things are required by our accounting department. What we're interested in is that funding type, the funding classification, segment 5, sub-job, and then cost code division and the cost type. We always leave the cost type as the last, and we use cost types. It's a requirement in Procore, but that's what we use to define our DBE. With the work breakdown structure, you can define your cost codes any way you want to do it. I mean, great deal of flexibility, great deal. And there you go. What do you want to do? How do you want to use it? It took us a while to understand, hey, we can make this like we want it. Okay, let's do it. All right, now that you have some idea of the segment structure, here's those cost codes again. You can see it follows that same format that we had before. Now, what can you do with all of this? Why go to all this trouble? Why? Well, you can track your funding source across all your projects. Where are you spending out of these buckets of money? Okay, well, oh, look at that. That's a Power BI sheet that tells me exactly, it answers that question. And I'll show the live version of this here shortly in Procore. But that's just one sheet. And of course, there's other grants out there, but this was built based on a new WBS structure, so it's kind of limited. That other project's about ready to be closed out anyway, so no big deal, right?
Yeah, and this is 3 FAA grants,
Yeah.
AIP 104 and 105, are current grants. We're self-funding work under AIP 2025. That's a future grant that we're going to be reimbursed for. So we're following the same format. We just set up a different funding code for it.
And if you'll notice, all the detail, all the number detail is found right there. And this project, the next time I show this, I'll probably have changed it because our accounting manager wants to see a little bit more detail on here. A couple other items, but I'll add those whenever I get back. And DBE Tracking. Now, you don't have to use Power BI to do your tracking. You can use an Excel. A lot of people are familiar with Excel spreadsheets. You show analytics. If you open up analytics out of the box, you see a lot of graphs, a lot of charts, a lot of numbers. And the first time somebody sees that, there's that deer in the headlights look. What is that? Oh, so it's kind of scary if you're unfamiliar with it. So, that was created, that's a graphic, that's just a power chart created from an Excel spreadsheet. That's an Excel spreadsheet right there, based on the analytics using Power Query. And that shows DBE. It's even got a slider up there. You can slide it back and forth. Okay. Now there's a Power BI. That's also located in our project. It's embedded in our project right now, but it shows a different aspect of DBE. DBE graphics. There's another Power BI piece. Here's an Excel spreadsheet. Our DBE manager, she just wants to see numbers. I don't care about none of that pretty charts. I want to see numbers. I want to know how much you're spending, where, and where it goes. Okay, here you go. There's more DBE numbers, another way to look at it. Again, this is an Excel spreadsheet using Power Query to go out there and do the same thing you would do in Power BI. You don't have to use Power BI for everything. You can create your own spreadsheets as well. But Power BI is so much better. But here again, this is another spreadsheet. She wanted another look at her DBE. She wanted more detail. Okay, and give me a minute. There you go. Okay, and here's another overall snapshot based on all projects broken down. And that's an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, distribution of costs. And the reason I talk about the Excel spreadsheets a little bit more than Power BI at this point, the distribution of cost spreadsheet pretty much has to be an Excel spreadsheet.
This is where our finance department was depending on their historical cost distribution worksheet to feed that standard form SF271. So we've got to get Procore to mimic that same data in a format that our accountants are used to seeing. And once they buy into that, then we can go ahead and make the transition fully.
Right. Now you remember the classification, that little K1 that we talked about back there in the detail? Well, guess what? Look across the top. There's letters there. Those numbers are populated based on that little code, that little segment in your cost code. It's populated. Well, there's a little bit of modeling to get to this point, but it's going to populate. And this is AIP 104, and you'll notice we've got at this point in time we've got about 306 construction costs, and we've got over $1 million in engineering costs. It's going to populate, and in turn, that's going to populate your SF271. Anybody that's familiar with SF271, you see over here on the right, there's an SF271, and then there's an exploded view that kind of shows you where those numbers fall in the chart. And we just hit refresh, she'll take it, and there's your numbers, and okay, she'll send it off to the FAA.
Yeah. So we have our architect and engineering expenses. They're on the fourth line down. Then we have our construction cost on the middle line down, the 1.3 million construction to date. It sums up the two above there. So it's a way to progressively track all those costs. That goes into the form, the SF-271, that we submit to the FAA for our reimbursement. So this used to be the prime contract that is now funding.
Okay. Okay. Now, I'm going to take this opportunity. Let's go into Procore. For people who haven't seen this, I had a conversation, and this is our live project too, by the way. Had a conversation with a group of people this morning. Well, how do you embed that? And I says, oh, it's real easy. Well, all this detail can be shown in Procore. You know, I've got several Power BI reports that are attached at the company level. And the beauty of this, they'll give you data at your fingertips at all times. A Power BI report. Okay, I'm going to select an app. I only have 4 here. Let's talk about our funding report that we showed earlier. It may make me sign in. And there we are. There's a live funding report that we just demoed from the snapshot earlier. That's right straight in Procore. And that's live. And it's coming from your data. I mean, it's at your fingertips at any time. All you got to do is go up here and click this embedded report. And the apps, let's look at DBE overall. Remember I told you our DBE manager, she was just interested in numbers? Well, here's your numbers. And I put a little graphics in there for color, you know, just to make it look a little bit prettier than just a blank numbers. But here's all your projects that show DBE, and it also has percentages here.
But if you're a public owner, you have a policy setting organization. We have a commission, 7-member commission, meets once a month. They are interested in seeing this sort of information. So rather than giving them a quarterly report that's 2 or 3 months old, we can give them report as of today and the invoices that were paid. If they want to know how much have you paid to a certain entity this month, both in total and to your disadvantaged businesses, woman-owned businesses, we can run it. Doug has a slider that we can generate that report.
Oh, yeah.
So again, it adds that value by engaging not just your internal company stakeholders, but your policy people, your board of commissioners, your city board, whoever it is that everyone answers to.
And there's a couple of different tabs. If you want to look at strictly federal, and by the way, our DBE requirement on federal projects is 12%.
12%.
And I think our commission wants to see 19% on local projects.
Correct.
So we got to make sure we're sticking to those values. And this is the beauty of this. And I'll show you how one of our properties director will use this. And like I said, different ways of looking at DBE. You want to look at what DBE, what projects they go on. Let's see here. Let's see. Yeah, line items, cost type 16 is on all these projects. Just different ways of looking at the different stuff, different DBE values. There again, and I also showed you the DBE report in the.
Well, one thing that's interesting from a disadvantaged business perspective is we set up Procore, of course, for our capital projects. When we show this to our CEO, one of the other issues that we have is tracking our goods and services that we pay through our O&M budget, totally separate from capital. Well, we have it structured now to where every professional service, whether it's our auditor, our legal, our marketing people, we run it through Procore with a similar cost code and cost type. So if our commissioners want to know, well, how much are we spending on goods and services, on professional services, on minorities? We can tell them because we're using Procore to report that from an O&M basis. Now, don't tell anybody in Procore that we're using it for our O&M expenses, our O&M budget. That's not capital. We're not supposed to do that.
Right.
But it's a great tool.
And let's take this is an overall project snapshot. Power BI is beautiful. It pulls everything at the company level, pulls all your detail. I mean, you can look and see who are the subs or who's the primes on these contracts and how much are they spending, how much, where are they spent complete. And one of the things that our director asked for, she says, well, I want it to look like this, and I want to know, I want to know when it gets closer to the 100% mark, 90, 80, 90% mark, where the DBE status is. So this is basically comparing the DBE. That way it gives the airport the opportunity to go out and say, okay, hey, we've got to meet this commitment. Why aren't you getting there? What do you plan on doing to get us there? So it gives us a look to keep us out of trouble, pretty much. And she also says, well, can you tell me how much we spent month to month last year, compare this year to last year? Okay, here you go. Well, what about DBE? How much DBE did we spend last year? Okay, here you go. There's a month to month detail of DBE. So essentially, the possibilities in your setup, when you set it up, what do you want to go for? What do you want to see? What do you want to be able to report on? And what do you want, what to be able to show? What does your commission want? What does your director want? What does he want to see? So those are the questions you need to ask up front when you set this up. And with the WBS structure, you can set it up any way you want to. So the next time you ask a Procore guy, says, well, show me what you got. And he says, well, what do you want? Well, you need to answer that question. Hey, this is what I want. I want to be able to show this. I want to be able to say, here.
And if you can answer those questions, then because of the work breakdown structure and the analytics tool and using their custom solutions group, or if you have a project analyst that is used to working with databases, you can get this sort of result. So it's a great tool that you can utilize. From what we've seen at a lot of the sessions that we've attended, is people are just, especially the owners, are just scratching the surface of what Procore can do. It's a really, really strong tool. So I really encourage you to reach out to Procore, reach out to our customer solution success managers, and have them work with you on these types of solutions for your own operation.
Yeah, Charmaine over with Procore, Charmaine, she's awesome. You want her to build some stuff, she will. You've got a question, you want to build your own stuff, and you got a question, she'll answer them. She's just great. And my suggestion is to avoid the deer in the headlights look. Don't show whoever you're trying to show. Don't show them those big, beautiful Power BI out of the box, dashboards. Don't show them that, because they're going to say, I don't know. Start out simple, and then build upon that. And then at some point, if you've got certain metrics you want to follow, then you can kind of build it. And you could take, if you've got a Power BI guy there somewhere in your group, he can go in there and modify those. He can tweak those. But start out simple. Give your people simple stuff. What do you want? Okay, here. Get them used to going to Power BI. Get them used to clicking on that apps and pulling that report up. And then say, well, what else would you like to see? Oh, well, maybe I want to see how much DBE we spent, last year, same month last year, year-to-year comparison, month to month. Okay, here you go, and just put it on another tab. Make it big, make it pretty, and at some point, then you can start shrinking this stuff down and giving them everything they need on one page.
Now, if I don't step in, Doug's going to keep talking. So I'm going to ask him to stop and see if you guys have some questions. I don't know where we are on time, but okay.
So you have all this data that you're showing, but where did the data come from? Is that just from the payout pieces?
Just from the invoices. That's strictly data from the invoices.
So the DBE information?
Yep. Remember the cost type that we had in there?
Yeah, and let me touch on that in a little more depth, because this is a really important point, and something that Jessica and I dealt with early on. When we first started, we're looking at CSI schedule of values and all this. It just didn't work for the owners. So what it really took us was to have that realization that as an owner, we want to know how much we're paying that general contractor and how much he is paying each of his subs. So our schedule of values is set up purely on the general contractor and all his subs, anyone he has a contract with. So when he submits his pay application, he's telling us how much he's going to pay each of those subcontractors from that pay application. But we have his original invoice as an attachment, like Doug pointed out earlier. So the detail is there. When that OIG auditor comes in and says, well, why did you pay them that much? I say, well, here's the attachment. Here are all the engineer certifications that work was done in the field. But here's the way we want to see it. Now, my question is, now that I know that Procore is getting ready to do GC Pay as a new tool, how are we going to accommodate it from the owner's perspective? Because my schedule of values is not the same as that general contractor schedule of values. But I'm writing the check, and it's going down to him, and then he writes his check. If I can tell my contractor that I can get you paid in 2 weeks so you can pay your subs in 2 weeks, he's going to jump all over that. But Procore better have a really good tool to help him get that money to his subs. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to challenge you guys. You know, we want to see it happen, and I'm not going to tell my contractors about it until it's there. But we need to talk. There's some challenges there. More questions? Yes, sir.
So you mentioned going in and making some adjustments to your WBS. How much manipulation can you configure the WBS after your initial setup?
Okay, after you set it up, if you've invoiced it one time, okay. If you've invoiced it one time, you're stuck. Oh, the only solution is to go in there, delete the invoice, and start over. And I'll tell you, that's in the beginning, I'm not going to tell you how many times we deleted a project and put it all back in manually.
Well, Doug had a full head of hair when we started.
Yeah. So, yeah. So that's why it's important to do it right up front. What do you want to do? And if you can get it to the level you want to report it, and you find something, and that's what we're doing. This is Taxiway Charlie Phase 2 right here. And we've already gone through. We're about to close out Taxiway Charlie Phase 1. And we're learning, we've learned a great deal, and this is our next iteration. Now, some of these things are legacy. Some of these codes we probably don't need. And the next version, we may modify this again, but I'll still be able to report. I'll still be able to pull DBE. I'll still be able to track those funding sources, just like on those other projects. Except for funding source. I mean, I could do it, but it may not be valuable enough to us because the project's almost closed out anyway. So, I have another way to identify those funding sources, but with the new WBS, it tells me that's AIP 104. It's easy,
But we've tried to look forward. On our terminal projects, we finance those with passenger facility charges, PFCs, and you identify specific projects within a PFC. So it's going to be very similar to multiple grants on horizontal work. When I set up our coding structure, I did it with both AIP funding in mind, PFC funding in mind, and bonds, if we are issuing bonds for construction. Then I can break that down by bond number or a detail within that bond. If the bond's only going to pay for a certain part of a building, then I will do that. If it's only paying for parking lots, I'll do that. So I can structure it that way.
And so this has actually been a big conversation with a lot of public owners across the board about, all right, we have an existing cost code structure, or we're bringing one in. Part of Procore is really a change management strategy within an organization. And it's either we're changing Procore, and sometimes we're changing the current processes. So if you do have a current setup within Procore, not leveraging WBS, we have worked with other owners and talked about, all right, how do we get these other goals into your current process? How can we add in? In your guys' standpoint, we were coming off out of the gates, and it was a better case for us to keep redoing the WBS over and again. And that was part of that 2-year process. But a lot of that, we have lessons learned, and we can do it more quickly now. But at the same time, there is a time expectation to testing it out, ensuring that it works, you're getting the value you need, and you can see that time we put in, the results here for the next few years are going to be incredible, the value you're getting out of Procore. Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Did I hear correctly that we can track if the GC is paying the subs?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, because in his schedule of values, he's putting that line item in that I'm paying Brian Blood Hauling $50,000 this month. And
Yes.
we'll have a monthly construction meeting with that sub in the room. And one of my running questions, agenda questions, is do you have any prompt payment complaints? Our contract compliance officer will come in the meeting and say, are there any prompt payment complaints to anybody in this room?
Yes, you can see exactly who he's paying.
Yes.
GCs like submitting their invoices this way?
It's a little different because we have full-time inspection by our engineer of record, and the engineer of record is the one that really puts it into our schedule of values, but he works closely with the project engineer for the GC. So at first there wasn't pushback because they knew it had to be done and the engineer was going to do 90% of the work. Now it's getting to where the GC is doing 80% of the work and the engineer's just reviewing it and helping out where there are a few issues. But that's because we can get that payment cycle through much quicker. That's my big carrot. You know, I can pay you quicker if you comply with my system.
I think one note in here too, when we were testing out in the implementation phase, we did involve the GCs as well.
Yes.
To have them test out with us, and that's another thing here at Procore where when we're rolling out and doing user acceptance testing, the more partners you can have take part in that process, the more buy-in and agency they have in it and they can give the feedback to ensure it works for them, the more that they are willing to submit the pay apps through Procore.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Are you using the Procore workflow tool to?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Doug loves workflow too.
I love that workflow tool. We're currently using it on the invoice process right now. We'll probably be bringing it on to correspondence here in the next few weeks. And when we do new contracts, I'll be setting that up as well. So yeah, that new workflow tool is awesome. Awesome. What
And
else
we're
we
using
got?
DocuSign as well.
Oh yeah, DocuSign.
Sending everything
DocuSign.
through.
We're integrated with DocuSign, and it's amazing as well. And the thing is, I just sent out a couple of progress report, and DocuSign has its own workflow, and I think the workflow will be applied to documents at some point too. Will it not?
Ooh, that's a good question.
thought I
about
heard
where it's
somebody
coming
say
through.
that.
With CDM, yes, it will, and I know it's on the roadmap for the
Right.
workflow tool.
But that's fine. If you integrate with DocuSign, just like the weather progress report, it comes in every week, or the weather delay report, excuse me. It comes in every week, and the contractor signs it, general contractor signs it, our inspector signs it, and then our properties director signs it. So, I mean, you really don't need an internal workflow with Procore because DocuSign has one, but you can put that document in the documents, send it directly. I mean, it's one document and it stays right there. You can send it through DocuSign, through their workflow, and it comes back and it's still right there, signed. Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, one of the triggers for us moving into an automated system was back in 2017, we do an annual audit, and our auditor came in and said, your operating budget looks fine, but on your capital budget, you need to put more controls in place. You need to have a system that gives you automated controls, that you have checks and balances. Our ERP that we had established or started installing about 5 years earlier was pretty mature. So it was time to go ahead and implement the capital projects part. That's when we started looking into it and selected Procore.
What was the time from invoice to payment before and after?
Ooh, it would vary. No, in a best case scenario, 30 days. Frequently, 6 to 8 weeks.
That was before.
Yeah.
We're well under 30 days now.
And it would, as I think in the presentation that preceded us, or another presentation, there were some invoices that would get lost, and whose court is it in, where is it? You get that phone call, somebody that's supposed to approve it is on vacation or left the company, and all those nightmares.
In most cases, it's 2 weeks or less. But occasionally, for some of the contractor invoices, if there's a problem with the engineers before they put it in, it may go up to 30 days. Depending while they're working out the details. But in all cases here lately, it's been under 30 days.
Yeah, and as you would expect, it's that learning curve when we have a new project starting up. That first invoice or two that gets submitted, it gets asked to be revised and resubmitted a time or two. But by the second, third invoice, it's not really good workflow that comes through very smoothly. Okay. Other questions?
One of the, we are in the middle of implementation too, so I'm wondering in the invoices, if there's comments on singular line items, how do you guys track it? Do you just put the PDF back? How do you provide comments on
In the workflow, we can put comments in the workflow itself. It's kind of a general comment, or in the PDF, we can have markups done on the PDF and upload a different copy. There are a lot of different ways that you can put that into the system.
What else y'all got? You know, go ahead. Yes, sir.
So when you're setting up your WBS, you decided not to track material costs. I imagine you'd want to know
That's
the fluctuation of pavement. You know, you buy a lot of pavement.
it's well, you know.
Well,
you wanna
when you
answer
say
that?
material cost, stored materials are the item that gave us the greatest challenge in dealing with stored materials, because we don't apply a retainage against stored materials. So we have to make sure that that's broken out separately and in the supporting documentation. So that's, Doug deleted probably dozens of invoices because of the stored materials problem and re-entered them.
Yeah, we've had some issues with store, but yeah, the quantities, all those quantities, with each invoice, there's an attachment. Okay, that's where all the quantities are maintained. So you know, from an owner's perspective, we don't really care as long as it's right.
Yeah.
You know, I mean.
Well, and the engineer of record, we're paying him to maintain a quantity book. So with each pay application, he'll update his quantity book for that pay application. He'll have the drawings highlighted with what areas of work were completed for that pay period. It's attached inside his quantity book. Now they're starting to do that electronically. You know, I'm hoping that that can migrate into Procore either as a submittal or in a quantity book tool. It's, Procore was written for vertical construction primarily. We do a lot of horizontal construction, totally different animal. And I'd love to see Procore start to consider, that process for those general contractors. There's a lot of horizontal work done, a lot of Department of Transportation work.
The thing to take away from today, from this breakout session, is Procore is very flexible. Determine what you want to do and what you want to report on, and set it up with those things in mind. And really the sky's the limit. What do
reach
you want
out
to
to them when you hit a roadblock.
Yeah.
When you've got a problem, reach out to them and ask for some help. We weren't bashful.
Yeah.
And one thing that's good about public owners is we're not competing with anybody. I've had a half dozen other airports contact me and say, hey, what are you guys doing it? How are you doing it? I'll be happy to talk to Department of Transportation, any other. We all want the public owners to succeed, because if you're implementing this tool at your facility for similar projects, I'm going to learn from your lessons and your best practices. It's a little bit different. The saying in the airport industry, if you've been to one airport, you've been to one airport. Yeah. The other big saying, what is an airport? An airport is a construction site with a runway, because we always have something under construction. Mm-hmm. But when we build it to last. Pavement's got to last 50 years. We don't sell our buildings. We don't sell the terminal. We're going to own it. We're going to maintain it. The guy that has to maintain it is right next door. If I don't build it right, guess who he's going to come kicking the butt? So we want to make sure it's done right. And we want to make sure that our team members, our contractors, our architects and engineers have that same culture. They're equally progressive. They want to succeed. They want to do it right.
Right. And, looking at this cost, I think, what time are we supposed to quit? A few minutes ago. Well, one last thing, if we knew what we knew now, if we knew it then, our cost codes, budget codes wouldn't look like that. Okay, just going to say, with the WBS, if the WBS would have been available and we had a little bit more experience under our belt, we would probably do it different. But for us, that's the best way today. The next project, it may be a little bit different. And we'll have some more polished tools that we can use to report with. Okay? All right. Any last questions?
Thank you.
Is everybody ready to go?